This medium tank has to be one of the strongest mediums in terms of being an all-round tank within World of Tanks console, and of course today's video is focused around the M48A5 pattern and how you can play a tank that, to be honest with you, doesn't have anything overwhelmingly overpowered about it, but still have a tank that is very solid in the game and you can come away with wins, and also how you can come away with some extra kind of damage that you may not have been able to get with some other vehicles just purely based on the all-round nature. And I guess that's what the M48A5 pattern does really well. You think of it like for example, a Centurion Action X. It's a similar sort of playstyle. It's the American version, but this tank has a bit more to offer, I feel like, than the Centurion Action X. That's kind of why I enjoy playing this vehicle, and we actually recently picked it up. Now, I knew that it was going to be good because we'd played the M46 pattern, which was exceptional. I've played the Iron Arnie M47 pattern recently, which if you haven't had a look, I highly recommend you watch yesterday's video, which looked at the M47 Iron Arnie, which is the tier 10 medium that is just better than this one, although it isn't really a medium, it's more of a heavy tank, and it certainly has the armor of a heavy tank nonetheless. But either way, we're basically going through within this game farming up early damage, and this is a spot that you guys can use at the beginning of the game, and then you can kind of move forward and deal with the rest of the game as and when you see fit. And that's kind of what I like about this tank, is that you have the mobility, you've got the accuracy, you've got all of the bonuses of being a kind of top tier medium tank within tier 10, as well as also having the mobility and just the general all-round nature that allows you to be super flexible. And remember, flexibility within World of Tanks, at least at the top level, as you kind of get more and more experience with the game, is the most important thing in my opinion, because it allows the player to impact the game rather than the tank impact the player. So that's kind of where I find flexibility to be super important, and why a lot of players, you'll get to a point where, you know, you can play and mouse and do really well, but because it is just so slow, you're never going to be able to have amazing games every single time in the tank. Yes, you could probably get a lot of damage every single game, but it becomes a hell of a lot harder to do that. So that's where I feel like tanks like this are very good for a newer player who's maybe trying to learn a few things, as well as having the fact that you can kind of move around and essentially learn more of the map positions within the game. And that's where I feel like this tank really does benefit. Now, you can see here, this position's kind of drying up at this point. Now, yes, we can get some extra shots of damage, but for some reason deciding that I wanted to bounce off of bat chats is the thing that we're doing at the moment. Now, we're trying to just open up some shells. We can see that there's someone sat in the town area opposite this kind of valley area that we're in at the minute, which is a common spot for people to be in, so we're not surprised. Now that we know that the enemy team are kind of looking over this way, I'm just trying to get some different opportunities for some damage. You can see here, just trying to go for the machine here. You definitely don't want to be cresting ridgelines all too much with the M48 pattern, because most of the time people will just pen you in this thing. It's not got the best turret armor, but it's relying upon being able to hit the opponents every single time, multiple times, for them to actually hit you. So that's where this tank does really well, and we're able to here at the end of the game, or at least kind of the midpoint of the game, I guess, the point at which our team just starts steamrolling the enemy's team as we can farm up a ton of damage. So you saw there, before we'd really got any real progress within the game, we'd only done about 1800 damage, and you can see very quickly with the 5-second approximate reload you get in this tank, you're able to do things like this, where the IS-4, who granted decided he's going to go for an open field, is basically just getting farmed from full health by me just permanently retracking him, aiming where the repair speed of his tank is going to kind of allow him to move just a slight amount, and then able to aim at the track where he's repaired. So that's kind of where this tank is really awesome, and why you're able to have games like this. You can see here the 57 Heavy deciding that he's trying to go for us. I'm going to stop here. I don't really want to get clipped by the 57 Heavy, since there is still damage left in this game and there are still some tank destroyers on the enemy team who we have no idea what hit points they're on. Unfortunately getting unlucky there, destroying the water tower or something that was in the way. Not actually getting any damage though, which was disappointing, but so far 4,400 damage has been done, and it's been very, very easy, and that's what the M48 really does. It's not a particularly hard tank to get a hold of. It's not a hard tank to really take advantage of all of the benefits in, because it has just so many and has that all-round potential, and that's where I think this tank comes in really, really well. I'm of course getting a little bit annoyed that I'm bouncing. It's probably down to the fact that we bounced off of the backchats earlier as well, and then bouncing off of the side. I was going for the tracking shot, but of course trying to get damage at the same point, so can't be too upset. It is what it is. Now at this point it's just a case of getting forward to try and get as much damage on the opponents before we win the game, because that is the inevitable thing, and luckily because we are in the M48 we can go about 40 kilometers an hour. Now you'll note that that was up a slight incline, and you could probably look at about 45 kind of on the flat roughly, dependent on the terrain type and stuff like that, but you can see here slight incline again, back down to about 35, so it is fairly quick, but it is not the quickest. So you're not going to be like a Barask or something that is basically a light tank or at least having the ability to move like a light tank. It does have pretty bad movement, but you can see here just going after some shells, flicking onto people. The T92 on the enemy team is of course there. We go for the shell, unfortunately don't manage to hit him before our team finish him off, and the only tank left is of course the Object 268 version 5, which most likely we're going to take a hit if we YOLO him, but we're hoping that the backchat doesn't manage to get there before us, but it's looking like he probably is. Can we get a shot of damage before the game ends? Should have probably gone for a tracking shot and some damage to be able to get some more assistance, but it doesn't matter as we did pick up 6,000 damage and 602 assistance, so not a bad round of World of Tanks console, but of course there is still plenty to be desired within that one. We could have definitely done with hitting the backchats in a very simple game playing on highway there. So let's have a look at another gameplay in the M48A5 pattern, and I'll see you in a second. Now then, what about in a gameplay where maybe things don't quite go as you expected and you're having to play on a map like Himmelsdorf, because of course this tank is a medium tank with basically no armor, so you're not relying on your armor model whatsoever to be able to bounce anything, so you've got to play to the tank's advantages, and we're going to see how you can do that on a map like this. Granted, this is not the perfect game, so we made quite a few mistakes that I'll point out as we go through. Of course, trying to play this tank late at night, which is when I was doing, was probably not the best idea, but either way, we came out with a few good results. I had a better result than this, but this I feel like shows a more representative view of what the M48 pattern is, because it's not perfect. There are a few flaws, one being the armor model, some being that the DPM is good, but it's not necessarily as effective as some of the other mediums you might come up against. A lot of the autoloaders in the game will just farm you completely, so that's not ideal. And also, like, sometimes you can just be let down by, in general, the mobility a little bit, because it's not the fastest tank in the game, as we've already kind of mentioned. But you can see here we're catching the other M48A5 pattern out in the middle of the open, so we're just ploughing a few rounds into him. For some reason in this game, it kind of got me by surprise, but the enemy team just YOLO'd, like, went straight through both flanks on the left and right hand side, and were just farming continuously. And I have no idea, this strat is not a good one for the majority of times, but yeah, the enemy team definitely got lucky in this one. They just steamrolled all of our heavies that were on the flank, and unfortunately for us, once again the accuracy coming in really annoyingly, to be honest, and we're ending up just bouncing things that we probably shouldn't. We're going through trying to deal damage on tanks that we probably shouldn't, and of course we've got things like the Maus here on the bottom kind of pushing forward, and there is a 3-man platoon, I believe, of Mauses and heavy tanks. So that's probably why we didn't end up winning this game. I try and get a shot onto the Maus because that's going to be the pain if he manages to get in the cap or something, but we try and go for the final shot on the E100, try and track him again, and of course when we try and do that, it only bounces off the back. So yeah, not an ideal scenario whatsoever. The enemy team are in the cap as well, so that means worst case scenario I'm going to have to YOLO into the cap at some point to try and reset and come away with something. The FV215B183 on the enemy team is over there, but I know that it's time, you know, I don't actually want to lose to cap, so I am going to try and mobilize myself towards there to at least get one reset or something off. Maybe our team can still win even with the YOLO wagon that is the 3 heavy tanks on the same platoon. We then find ourselves up against the Maus, because why would you not want to come up against the Maus? I decided it's time to load some heat. The APCR is just not it. I decided to go straight past the Maus, as you probably should if you want to guarantee a victory, or at least potentially guarantee a victory. And it's time to move forward. These are all in a platoon. I'm pretty sure the 6-6 platoon is not actually that bad. Their clan is actually not bad at all. And so at this point it's a case of trying to figure out who has the cap points. Obviously the Maus doesn't, but it looks like we may be able to get a shell into him. I'm going for the lower plate, of course, don't manage to do it. The E100 now pulling out, we decide to remove from the game. That's one of them out of the game, and it could definitely be one, but I'm going after this enemy E100. He's of course angling. The Maus then just YOLOing, which is the right thing to do. You know, sometimes you do actually have to move forward, but this guy is not an idiot, and he does actually end up taking me out because the pattern is just not going to bounce any rounds, and you definitely wouldn't be wanting the pattern to bounce rounds if you've got yourself in the right position. Of course, that wasn't the ideal scenario where I have to go back to the base to try and reset, but you could see, you know, you can still get a decent amount of damage either way. And even on a game like that where pretty much everything went wrong from all perspectives, you know, bouncing off of a lot of people, not aiming 100% from myself, and then your team just getting crunched basically by a ton of heavy tanks on the most heavy tank map in the game, and there you go, still coming away with a decent result. But yeah, that is the M48 pattern. It is a very solid tank, but it's not overpowered, and that's something I really like in the game. An underrated tank to say the least, and of course a very powerful one in the right hands, and I really enjoy playing it. So I highly recommend. The entire grind is absolutely amazing to get up to the M48 pattern, and yeah, you probably should give it a go. Thank you very much for watching this video, but don't forget, if you want to see an overpowered tier 10 American medium tank, then have a look at the M47 Iron Arnie, which is the essentially a M48 pattern that is basically a Super Pershing at tier 10. Yeah, it's unbelievable, and one of the weirdest kind of most heavy mediums I've ever seen in the game. So I highly recommend you have a look at that on screen right now, and if you're not interested in that, maybe have a look at some of the other gameplay and tank reviews on the right hand side playlist. Thank you, and I hope I'll join you in the next video. Goodbye.